It's okay. Hispanic is a term created by the U.S. federal government in the early 1970s. So for those of you here today with us who were born less than 30 years ago, you grew up with this term and perhaps understand that it has always existed. But it was created in an attempt to provide a common denominator to a large but diverse population with connection to the Spanish language or culture from a Spanish-speaking country. The term Latino is increasingly gaining acceptance among Hispanics, and the term reflects the origin of the population in Latin America. Hispanics or Latinos are those people who classified themselves in one of the specific Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino categories listed in the Census 2010 questionnaire. Mexican, Mexican American, Chicano, Puerto Rican, or Cuban, as well as those who indicate that they are other Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino. Persons who indicated that they are other Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino include those whose origins could be from Spain, the Spanish-speaking countries of Central or South America, perhaps the Dominican Republic, or people identifying themselves generally as Spanish, Spanish American, Hispanic, Hispano, Latino, and so on. And so on. Well, the question by Richard is, why is it that many Spanish-speaking people do not like to call themselves Hispanic? And as we just identified, I think that older generations, people that were around before the 1970s, this is not the term that they grew up with or that they are accustomed to. And they are accustomed to calling themselves perhaps Colombian or Boliviano, or, depending on what country they come from, their nationality. And they do resist being grouped because the cultures are actually quite different in these countries. There are some similarities, of course, but there are a lot of differences. And I think that it's akin to taking all of the English-speaking countries, for example, Australia, England, United States, Canada, some of the British Virgin Islands, and the other countries that speak English, and grouping us all together and giving us a name. And when you think of that, what do we really have in common with Australians or people who live in the British Virgin Islands? Certainly there are some commonalities, but certainly there are a lot of differences. And certainly a lot of people would resist that type of grouping. And Joyce says it is because the government labeled it. That is exactly what it is. And it is the U.S. government. This is not a term that is commonly used in other parts of the world. This was done primarily for census purposes and for counting people. And, instead of taking a look at counting people from over 20 countries individually by those countries, the U.S. government decided to group people from those countries together and give them the term Hispanic. Thank you, Joyce. So the reason I asked the question and so on, because also there is a write-in field where you can self-identify. It's self-identification, and on the sentences, you can actually choose your identity. So you can be anyone who you want to be or who you feel that you are. So whatever you feel that your background is, you can write that in on the census. Identity other than ethnic and racial is often cultural, or what we perceive our culture to be. Culture is defined by Merriam-Webster as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Also, the characteristic features of everyday existence, such as diversions or way of life, things shared by people in a place or time, perhaps popular culture. An example here in the U.S. would be the Southern culture. I contend that dissecting that definition, we all share certain characteristic traits, no matter what our background is. Many times it's described how tight the family bond to include extended family is, or something like that. However, that isn't true. Isn't that true, I should say, with many non-Latino families you know. I think if you were to ask Asian families, or you were to ask Native American families, or Italian families, they would all tell you that their families are very tight. So it does not need to be something that is specific to Latino families. There are many factors that come into play to include education, socioeconomic status, urbanization, and isolation. So let's look at what are commonly recognized as the components of Latino culture. I'd like you to ask yourself if they apply to you and to your family. Let's start with family values. Traditionally, the Hispanic family is defined as being a close-knit group and the most important social unit. The term familia usually goes beyond the nuclear family. The Hispanic family unit includes not only parents and children, but also extended family, which could be aunts, uncles, cousins, and second cousins, and so forth. In most Hispanic families, the father is the head of the family, and the mother is responsible for the home. It's quite traditional. Individuals within a family have a moral responsibility to aid other members of the family experiencing financial problems or unemployment, poor health conditions, and other life issues. In other words, they take care of one another. Family ties are very strong, and when someone, for example, travels to another city or a town to study, or even for a short visit for business reasons, vacation, they often stay with relatives to celebrate holidays, birthdays, baptisms, first communions, graduations, weddings, and other life events. Hispanic families instill in their children the importance of honor, good manners, and respect for authority and the elderly. Preserving the Spanish language within the family is a very common practice for most Hispanic homes. Now, I want to ask you, how many of you identified with many of these values, family values that I just mentioned? And perhaps language is defining here for non-Latinos. I can tell you that my own ethnic background is Eastern European, and I do not speak those languages. I speak Romance languages. I can speak fluently in some and fairly well in others, but I don't speak the languages of my own family background. This is something that Hispanic families and Hispanic homes tend to want to preserve. Although I will tell you that in my own experience as a recruiter in my past, having to hire bilingual employees, it is not easy because they tend to walk the line of either perhaps if they were born in the United States, learning Spanish verbally, but perhaps not having the formal schooling education with the grammar and writing skills. And on the other hand, their English writing skills and English grammar may be lacking. So it is very difficult to find individuals who are completely biliterate. In other words, that they are as good in English as they are in Spanish, and both of those are very, very good. I do want to stop for some questions. Kathy and Kelly can identify with those values. Absolutely. I think a lot of families would identify with those values. Okay. Let's move on now to etiquette. Etiquette is important no matter where you live and who you are. And Spanish speakers tend toward formality in their treatment of one another. A firm handshake is a common practice between people as greetings and for leave taking. But a hug and a light kiss on the cheek are also very common greeting practices between women and men, and women who are close friends or family, and sometimes even in business settings. The Spanish language provides forms of formal and non-formal address. So whereas in English we only have one form of, for example, the pronoun you, In Spanish, you have a formal and an informal that you would use for your friends. It's very polite and familiar commands, and the use of titles of respect before a person's first name. Um, I think in English, I'm trying to think what the equivalent of don or doña would be. I guess Mr. or Miss. I think that we in the South, in the southern states here in the United States, oftentimes that is still a tradition where a common greeting would be Miss Jane. They'll use the first name with the word Miss before it, or Mr. John or Mr. Tom. That's quite common, but in the northern states, that's not something we generally do. In informal settings, conversations between Spanish speakers can be quite animated, loud, fast, and have a lot of animated gestures, talking with the hands and body language in order to convey points and emotion. And Hispanics usually give great importance to and place great value on their appearance and their looks as a sense of honor and dignity and pride. Formal attire is very commonly worn by Hispanics to church, any type of social gatherings, parties, and work. Tennis shoes and jeans, which is the norm a lot of times, even in church congregations and even in job interviews, believe it or not, tend to be more popular among Hispanic women, particularly in non-formal settings. Hispanics tend to be more relaxed and flexible about time and punctuality than the U.S. However, I think that to a large part, this is also somewhat of a stereotype. For instance, some people who are invited for an 8 a.m. event may not arrive until 8:30 or later. Well, this is changing a lot, and I'll tell you that my experiences, for example, in large cities and metropolitan areas, for example, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, and other places like that, people are on time. If they work in banking or they work in healthcare or an industry that requires appointments and people to be on time, of course they're on time. If they have more of a rural life, live perhaps more on the fringes of cities or in the outskirts, and the ambiance is more relaxed and the culture is more relaxed, then that's what happens. And I think that we have the same thing to a large extent here in the United States, in our southern states and our southeastern states as well. I myself noticed when I moved from the north to Texas for a time, I was very frustrated the very first time I went grocery shopping and couldn't stand it when the person ahead of me in the cash-out line was just chit-chatting away with the cashier like there was no problem whatsoever. So I think it depends a lot on where you live. Hispanics tend to be reserved about public speaking because of their heavy foreign accent, and this actually can be an impediment to them wanting to be more assertive, and that's kind of unfortunate. But it is the way that they perceive treatment to be, and it's not only a perception. It is a lot of times what treatment is, how treatment is. People oftentimes with accents, whether they are Hispanic accents, Spanish accents, or from any Asian accents, it really doesn't matter. But oftentimes people with accents are perceived as not being as intelligent. And that's something that is actually a problem that we have here in the United States with native English speakers. So when we take a look at our next point, which is rituals, we have Joy saying, don't take siestas in NEPA. It's really interesting because depending on the industry you're in, for example, if you live down in the Maya Riviera where I did, the siesta is normal. And they're not always 2 hours, sometimes they're 4 hours. But it doesn't mean anything other than you're working a split shift. And we do have those types of schedules here in the U.S. where people work split shifts. In fact, the last company I worked at did offer split shifts. So you could work maybe from 9 to 1, take a couple of hours off, come back in the evening, and perhaps work 5 to 9. Some people really enjoy that. And, of course, the reason for it is when you're down so close to the equator down there, it's very hot. And a long time ago, people, before air conditioning, people would go home, go under the shade. You need to take a shower in the middle of the daytime in addition to eat and see your family and so forth. So these are kind of traditions that are disappearing nowadays, because my last trip down to the Mayan Riviera, I noticed an awful lot of stores that were just open without closing midday. Of course, they've all got air conditioning now, so I think technology, again, plays a lot in those types of situations. So, Linda's got a question. So Linda's comment, kind of a question comment, is very good. It's an observation that she's heard, perhaps from hiring managers or employers, that they're kind of leery to hire Latino workers because they feel that they may have a punctuality issue on the job, and punctuality may be very, very important in the workplace. Well, we're very accustomed here. If you're an hourly employee, a lot of hourly employees need to do timekeeping, such as a punch clock or some type of a timekeeping in their computer, or just the fact that your boss sees you're walking in late doesn't fare well on your annual reviews. So anyone could understand why that would be a concern, but how it's addressed when you come from a culture where timekeeping may be slightly more relaxed. It's very important that hiring managers and human resources professionals are very clear with all of their employees, not singling out their Latino employees, or even in the interview process, and simply asking the question, this shift, if you're hired for the position, starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, for example. Is there any reason that you would not be able to meet the guidelines and requirements of the position? If the person says that they agree that they can be to work for 8 o'clock in the morning on a regular basis, then you've set the expectation and they understand the expectation. And so it's managed by performance management if there is a situation, by coaching and counseling, and then progressive disciplinary action, just like you would with anyone else. We have Linda asking another question. Linda's now asking the question that, if, for example, she used healthcare. So you have someone who has been given a 9 o'clock appointment for a medical appointment, and she wants to know, does the doctor or the nurse need to really be very specific and reiterate, when I say 9 o'clock, I mean 9 o'clock? It certainly couldn't hurt, but I think that it would sound condescending. And I think that perhaps a better way to approach that would be, it's very important to us that all of our patients are timely for their appointments. In fact, we recommend that our patients arrive 10 minutes early before their appointment so that they can check in and we're sure that they're here, because the doctor's schedule is very, very busy. And unfortunately, if our patients arrive late, they may have to give up their appointment time to the next person who did arrive on time. And so again, we don't want to single people out. We want to treat everyone with the same respect and dignity. And that's, I think, a fair way to do it. If anyone has a comment on that, I would really like to hear it. It's funny, Joyce. Joyce sent us that, just to be sure to add that in the orientation, that American 8 o'clock means 7:45. It's really interesting because I myself, I have somewhat of an issue with being on time. If it's something that's extremely important, then I will definitely be on time. Like this, I was here on time today. But I also know someone else who happens to work here at College Misericordia, who told me that he grew up, and he's African American, by the way, and he told me that he grew up with his father teaching him that if you're on time, you're late. That you should always be 15 minutes early for everything, no matter what it is, church service, an appointment, no matter what it is, lunch, date, what have you. And that's interesting. I didn't grow up that way. My parents taught me that on time was on time. And now that I'm thinking about it as we're having this conversation here, I think my parents were often late too. So I think that's in my family somehow. I don't know how that works. All right. Well, let's move on. If no one else has, we do have another comment saying going to the doctor in Puerto Rico, you get there at 8, sign in to breakfast, and expect to be called to see the doctor sometime in the morning. It's interesting. Yeah, sometime in the morning. It's interesting because where your own physician is not being very timely with the appointments, it would be very difficult for patients to have that level of patience and actually sit there and wait. It does happen here sometimes. Sometimes you go to a doctor and the receptionist says, you know what, doctor got held up at the hospital, had an emergency patient or something happened, ran over, and so you're going to have to wait. And I think that especially in the northern part of the United States, the Yankee culture gets people hot under the collar, especially if they live in places like perhaps New York, where it's very typical that people will stand up and say, I'm not standing for this. I'm leaving. You call me when the doctor's here and I'll come back. So we give it back to them, which is interesting. All right, let's take a look at rituals and religion. No, I went to eating habits. Okay, rituals and religion. In the Hispanic world, religion has traditionally played a significant role in daily activity for many families. More than 90% of the Spanish-speaking world is Roman Catholic. In recent years, other faith denominations have experienced large growth especially within the U.S. Hispanic community. The church influences family life and community affairs, giving spiritual meaning to the Hispanic culture. Each local community celebrates its patron saints with great importance and ceremony, perhaps even more than individuals do for their birthdays. It's a huge holiday when it's your patron saint's day. As in other parts of the world, traces of religions from Indians and African Americans of Latin America are found in Catholicism that Hispanics practice. Again, I can point back to my own experiences, having lived among people who will tell you that they are Mayan. They are Mexican nationality, but they feel that they are ethnically Mayan. They have very little influence in their family, in their villages. Some of them come from very small villages on the Yucatan Peninsula. And they speak Mayan in their homes, and they have a huge influence of Mayan religion kind of superimposed over Catholicism, or perhaps it's the reverse. I would suppose it is the reverse. And it looks quite a bit different than what you would find in any Catholic church here in the United States, or even in northern Mexico, where you have different influences, or in Chile, for example, Puerto Rico. Every country just has its own take, because the indigenous religions were, of course, adapted by Catholicism or by other Christian religions. Eating habits. Everybody's fun. Okay. Latino food, Hispanic food is some of the best food in the world, in my opinion. In Hispanic countries, a light meal is usually served for breakfast. That's not the big meal of the day. Here where you can now see on TV that everyone is jumping on the breakfast bandwagon with breakfast sandwiches, and they're very hearty breakfasts with bacon and eggs and potatoes. Usually in Hispanic countries, it's a light meal. And lunch, which is referred to as el almuerzo, is the mainstay kind of meal for the day. In some countries, it's customary for adult family members and children to actually come home for work or school, when we were talking about siestas before, for somewhere around 2 hours to be together for this meal. And la siesta, which is the rest period taken after lunch, is still common practice among adult Hispanics, especially older generations where they grew up with that tradition. Younger generations where you have kids in school all day, they're running a consolidated schedule from morning all the way through the afternoon, are not necessarily growing up with that tradition. In the early evening, they have la merienda, which is a light snack, perhaps coffee and some pastries or small sandwiches, something like that that's served. And the meal is usually an informal meal. It's possible that it's just for children because adults tend to eat their meal, their evening meal, their dinner very late compared to the United States, sometimes 9, 10. I've even seen it later than that at night, and a lot of times the kids are in bed by that time. So the supper is kind of small. It's a snack before bed, and it kind of concludes your day. However, we'll find that most Hispanics who have settled in the United States, and especially people who were born here, they're adopting the traditional three-meal system that we have here because that's the way they eat. And, especially with the school system now that schools provide the meals for children, they are now accustomed to eating this larger breakfast in school in the morning. And it's possible part of that is even contributing to obesity. I know that they're looking at new models for school meals. Midday and evening meals are important family and social events. Food is important, and food is important in a lot of cultures. Think about your own households, and how many times did mom or your aunt or your grandmother say, you have to be home for dinner. That's family time. I think a lot of families hear that. I know I heard that in my family. Mealtime is to sit down. That's when we get to spend the time together. Everyone has such hectic and busy lives that that's family time. Celebrations and holidays. In Hispanic countries celebrate the more popular international types of holidays like Easter, Christmas Eve, Christmas, New Year's, and of course Three Kings Day. But in addition, each country celebrates its Independence Day, just like we do here in the United States. The term Fiesta Nacional refers to an official holiday, official national holiday, and Las Fiestas refer to the types of festivals, local, regional, or national, that may be held only for a day or perhaps they last several days. Most holidays are centered on or have their origins in religions. Lots of saints' days are celebrated. National government offices might be closed or have limited hours for local or regional holidays. And with teaching and learning implications, to fully engage Hispanic audiences in the learning process, there are some noted differences that should be given to gaining and maintaining trust, some particular attention, especially when we have accents and we have new languages, and perhaps English is not a first language. So there are some differences in the learning process. Not that that isn't true with speakers of all kinds of other languages besides English. So greater acceptance of educational efforts will occur if learners in Hispanic community leaders are involved in the planning, the delivery, and the evaluation of the educational efforts. And I think that all goes back to the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And that happens to a great extent in Latino communities where you have a lot of people caring for children and following up with them and ensuring that they're on track with what it is that they're doing, not just one caretaker. Linda, as long as Linda is asking, since Joyce is on the line, if she might want to make a comment about long-term care. Well, this is true. Now we're right now we're talking about teaching and learning, but it's okay. But Linda's point, Joyce, is she's bringing up about long-term care. How really it's really non-existent because your family cares for you. There aren't really long-term care facilities. However, I will say that in larger cities, long-term care facilities are popping up, and things like hospices are popping up because again, technology is changing the world, and sometimes people are even moving to other countries to accept jobs, or they're moving across the country, and they can't necessarily, depending on what the situation is, bring their family, and so you are finding that they're not common. They're not common certainly like they are in the United States, but you will find that they're starting to exist. Oftentimes they're run by religious orders, so families feel very comfortable that they're receiving the care of nuns or brothers or what have you in these types of facilities. And Joyce says it's all about social economics, and it is all about social economics. So when we exhibit respect for learners, it's another important aspect of the Hispanic culture. There is a lot of respect. Teachers should be paying individual attention to learners. They should be greeting each learner as they come in the door and give each person a little bit of individual attention, handing papers individually rather than kind of like passing them down the row like a lot of teachers will hand a student and say, pass these out. Being sensitive to different cultures among Hispanics, perhaps writing educational materials at appropriate reading levels as well. The differences in educational levels, language skills, income levels, and cultural values among Hispanics need to be considered by educators when planning educational programs, especially extension educators. Even though Hispanics share the same language, again, as we've discovered, their cultures may vary considerably. Churches, local libraries, and recreational centers with child care arrangements if needed may be appropriate places, and they are appropriate places. Even here in our own community, you'll find that a lot of programming geared towards the Hispanic population of our area is held at church, in the community rooms of churches, in community centers, and so forth. A lot of times we go back to the old traditions of all cultures, which is word of mouth information being passed on by word of mouth. That is still a very valid and popular way that information is passed on in Hispanic communities. And again, grocery stores, churches, these types of places are the main meeting places for visiting, exchanging information, and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about collectivism. Latino families are identified as being collective. Typically, members are expected to achieve so that they can then in turn bring an economical and emotional benefit to their family structure. An example of a collectivist model could be seen, for example, in the migration patterns of Mexican immigrants in the United States. Oftentimes, immigrants have a friend or a relative waiting for them on the, quote, other side to help them with that transition. Collectivism is a basic cultural value that separates Latino culture in many ways from the dominant American mainstream, and it requires mutual empathy, allowing Latino adolescents to preserve their ethnic identity as they navigate through the dominant culture, which can be confusing in some respects. For example, it's very common for the eldest female in the family to be expected to be responsible for the caretaking of aging parents. And so they may put their own personal needs, education, or some other passion that they may have on hold because they feel such a responsibility to their parents to do that to their family members. It's very interesting. I asked this question of what does your culture mean to you to some young Dominican women. And they told me that, when they finished high school, it was very expected of them, of course, to complete their education in high school and to complete it with good grades. But then when it came time to talk about wanting to go to college, there was resistance within the family to allow them to go to college, or to be supportive, I should say. And I asked why. Well, I think that in the end, a lot of it boils down to the socioeconomic status of the family, perhaps, and the education level of the family. A lot of times in many cultures when family members' parents, above all, have not been college educated, they don't necessarily promote it to their children because it's a system that they don't understand. They themselves don't understand the college system. Although many generations want better for their children and will make great sacrifices for their children to get a college education, guilt can be a very useful tool in keeping your family members from doing things that they want to do. And that is common in a lot of traditions. I know Jewish families, there is a lot of guilt there with Jewish mothers as well, like to impart. But you got to go to college, Linda said. Absolutely, you got to go to college because you need to take care of your parents in style. Right, Linda? When Latino families begin to acculturate, some begin to see that perplexity of the dominant culture, for example, the mainstream culture, which really values assertiveness here in the United States, is you're expected to be assertive and a go-getter and get what you want, and also includes a lot of independence and achievement are the expectations. And so they can sense a kind of a struggle to balance that with the connectedness that their family expects from them to be maintained. So many Latinos, for example, reside with their families and continue to take on family expectations while trying to walk that tightrope or balance that very dominant cultural path, such as graduate school, for example. So I think what we're looking at here is that there really is not one identity that Latinos can claim as the Hispanic culture. It's really all over the board with a couple of commonalities in place. So I want to come back to the original question and ask you, is there a Latino identity? It's a yes or no question. So can I see some voting here? Kathy says yes, there is. Owen says yes, there is. Tasha says yes. All yes is coming in.
Cultural groups that an identity becomes stronger because there's so much, let's just say, there's so much pressure to conform and lose your own culture.
It's an interesting point that Linda brings up. And then I've got some on the board here as well, on the chat board. Linda says that oftentimes when you're coming into, for example, we'll just use the United States, for example, your family comes here, and you kind of lose that identity of where it is you came from, but because you come from a Latin American country, there's pressure to conform. You kind of find yourself grouped into that Latino identity. It becomes stronger. It comes stronger than your nationality, for example, because you don't want to lose it. And Rosette says that yes, there is a Latino identity, but it is very multi-layered and complex. And I think that that's very true. We've seen that today. Joyce says that there is a Puerto Rican identity for her, and if the Puerto Rican identity is strong, and the tradition I think here in the United States is perhaps because of the relationship that Puerto Rico has with the United States. The Puerto Rican identity is well recognized and strong and very ingrained into a lot of parts of our country geographically. Tasha says there are identities within identities, and that is definitely true, and I think it's true with all of us. There are larger cultures and many subcultures. Great. And while there are many unifying themes that flow through the Latino community, there are certainly just as many differences. But in the end, I see that as one of the great things about being human, the chance for us to celebrate our differences and our similarities. So I want to leave you today with some inspiration from the 2009 Latino Trendsetter Awards and words of wisdom from Willie Colon.
Achievement here at the United Nations, the GPS 8th Annual Latino Trendsetters Award.
As a lifestyle magazine, we cover sports, we cover health, we cover education, trends, technology, music, entertainment. And in covering those categories, we're in contact with people in those areas. So So we recognize leaders in those areas as the Latino Trendsetter Award.
Every year, DPM hosts this incredible event to pay homage to Latino leaders that are not only successful in their field, but also serve as role models for today's youth.
Your work here today proves to all of us here tonight that the future is in our hands and the future is now.
The honorees come from various fields such as arts and entertainment, business, law, medicine, politics, and the media. Many of the awardees expressed their gratitude for being recognized that evening and also mentioned how events like these are important for the Latino community.
It has been kind of like an urban myth, an urban legend that Latinos can't get to the top. So it's important for us to celebrate each other and our work and our contributions within the community and not waiting for outside people to say it's okay to be successful.
It's critical for young people to see that there have been people who've been successful, there have been people working on these issues and are committed to our youth.
We have doctors, we have lawyers. It's amazing to know that everybody's coming from the standard background.
I wish the youth knew more about this. You know, I wish we would do this on a bigger scale, but we'll get there.
Our youth are our greatest resource. So we need to dedicate our time and our treasure and our love and our dedication to our young people. Don't give up. Always try your hardest. We're a great community. Don't let anyone put you down, and do a lot of great things, helping each other out as well. Never give up your dreams. Regardless of what the obstacles are, always work hard. Always keep your eyes on the prize.
Hard work always pays off.
There was some Bronxites among those being honored that evening, such as our very own Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. and musical legend Willie Colon.
It vindicates what we've been saying all along, that a lot of talent comes from the borough, that there are many people who have persevered the dark days of the 70s and the 80s, and that ultimately have achieved well, and we're all over the planet, and we really have our tentacles in many different businesses, and so I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the fact that they come from the Bronx, and I'm happy that in their endeavors, in their careers, as they go out and branch out, that they really continue to give us a good thing.
It's very important that we have to have maturity because it's our moment, and the thing is that we got to prepare. The success is at the intersection of opportunity and preparation. If we're not prepared, we're not going to get it.
The awards gala was not just about honoring Latino leaders, but also preparing our youth for tomorrow. This year, DPM, in conjunction with the 100 Hispanic Women's Leadership Program, gave out 3 scholarships to City University of New York students.
This one scholarship is enough. I have to keep on going, keep on making you successful daily with my life. And that's what coaches all around the world should do. There should be no top point. You should just keep on going.
The celebration continued throughout the night with great entertainment and delicious food. The Latino Trendsetters Awards Gala does a great service for the community by honoring some of those unsung heroes.
I am the metamorphosis sound, the reborn, the living phoenix rising up out of the ashes with my beautiful people. Not a lost Latina soul in search of identity. Not a tragic New Yorican in search of the lands of the palm trees. Not fragmented, but whole. Not colonized, but free.
As Willie Colon said, success is at the intersection of opportunity and preparation. And I wish all of you success. Do we have any questions or comments? It's a great question. What general term should we use? Again, we come back to do we use Latino? Do we use Hispanic? And I think that oftentimes today that those terms are used very interchangeably, even within the same sentence, because there is a lot of crossover, but there's a lot of confusion as well. And I don't even, as we saw before, a lot of Latinos are more comfortable with the term Latino because they come from Latin American countries. And the term Hispanic, again, was created in the 70s. So I think people who are much younger and grew up with that term might be more comfortable with that than actually people who are a little bit older. If anyone has a comment on that, I'd love to hear it. That's perfect. Joyce has a great comment, which says, ask someone what they prefer. Yeah, and Deb says, I understand my son-in-law a lot more now. We both need to adjust. I'm going to tell you, Deb, that's about the highest compliment that I think I would ever hope to receive at a presentation. And Joyce says that she agrees. If she needed to pick one, it would be Latino. Great. Kathy, thank you very much for your comments. If there's anyone else that has a question or anything at all, I can always be reached at my email address, which is my first name, Carla, Karla, at wilkes-barre.org. My phone number is, of course, local area code 570-823-2101, and my extension is 116. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to me if there's anything that you feel that I might be able to do for you in any way in regard to this presentation or in regard to workforce development, human resources, anything at all in the community. I'm here to serve you, and that's what I like to do. So again, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you at the next NEPDEC function or meeting.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and this closes the meeting. Thank you much.